She was 8 years old the first time she prayed for something and felt like the answer never came. She used to believe Christmas could fix anything. Broken toys, bad days, even grown-up sadness. Until her legs stopped working the way they used to. The fall didn't just break her body. It broke her place in the world. The stairs she once ran up became something she avoided looking at. The shoes she loved stayed untouched under her bed. And every time someone said, "You're so brave," she wondered why she had to be brave just to exist. Welcome to SoulStir Stories. If this kind of story speaks to you, feel free to subscribe, like, and share. Camilla was 8 years old when she learned that falling could change more than just bones. Before that day, her body had always felt like something she could trust. Her legs carried her wherever her thoughts wanted to go. Up the stairs, down the hallway, outside into the cold without asking permission. She never thought about walking. It simply happened. The afternoon she fell, the house smelled like pine and dust. Christmas decorations waited in a box near the wall, untouched. Music played faintly somewhere, the kind that made everything feel safe. She was halfway up the stairs when she turned, smiling, trying to show off how fast she could climb. Her foot slipped. The sound that followed wasn't loud, but it stayed. Her body hit step after step, each one stealing something she didn't know she could lose. By the time her mother reached her, Camilla couldn't move her legs. Not because they were broken, but because they no longer felt like they belonged to her. Camilla always felt that hospitals don't feel kind to children. The lights are too bright. The beds are too high. The voices are careful in a way that scares you more than honesty. In the background, doctors spoke softly. They used words like injury, healing, time. But Camilla only heard the pause before their sentences ended. That pause stayed with her. By the time Christmas lights appeared in windows outside, Camilla had learned how to sit very still. She learned how to smile without meaning it. She learned how to answer questions without telling the truth. When anyone asked, "How are you feeling today?" her only response would always be, "I am okay." What she didn't say was that her legs felt like strangers. That every night she tried to move them in the dark just to check if they were still there. She hated the stairs now. She avoided looking at them. They felt like something that had betrayed her. Outside, children ran without thinking. Inside, Camilla counted seconds. She watched snow fall for the first time from a chair. That was when she realized something terrifying. Life was continuing without waiting for her. That night, alone in bed, she pressed her hands against her legs and whispered the only thing she still believed might listen. "Please, just give them back." Christmas came closer. People asked what she wanted. She wanted to scream. She wanted to say she wanted her body back. Her place back. Her future back. Instead, she said nothing. On Christmas Eve, the house felt heavier than the snow outside. Camilla sat by the window long after everyone slept, lights from the tree blinking softly behind her. She didn't write a long wish. She didn't dare. She wrote one sentence on a small piece of paper, folded it tightly, and held it in her hand until it warmed. "I want to walk again." She placed it under the tree and whispered something she had never whispered before. "If you're real, please don't forget me." Outside, snow fell quietly. Inside, an 8-year-old girl waited, not for presents, but for proof that miracles still knew her name. The night passed without dreams. Camilla slept the way exhausted children do, not peacefully, but empty. When she opened her eyes, the room felt unfamiliar. Pale winter light rested on the walls, soft but cold. For a moment, she forgot. Then she tried to move her legs. The familiar heaviness returned. Christmas morning didn't arrive loudly. It slipped in quietly, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. Camilla stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. The sounds of the house waking up floated toward her. The kettle, the slow footsteps, the careful movements of someone trying not to make too much noise. She hated that part. She hated how everyone moved differently around her now. When she finally made her way to the living room, the tree lights blinked gently, waiting for excitement that didn't come. Gifts rested beneath it, wrapped neatly, chosen with care and love and the quiet fear of choosing the wrong thing. Camilla's mother, Ruth, smiled when she saw her. It was the same smile she had practiced in the mirror. "Good morning, sweetheart." Camilla smiled back because that was the rule now. Don't let your sadness become someone else's burden. They opened presents slowly. Camilla thanked her mother for every gift, even the ones she knew she wouldn't use. Shoes that were still beautiful. A skipping rope that stayed in its box. Ruth noticed. Of course she did. She apologized without saying sorry, touching Camilla's hair, squeezing her hand. Camilla pretended not to see it. After the last gift was opened, there was nothing left to do. So Camilla wheeled herself to the window. Outside, the world looked exactly the way it should have. Snow-covered sidewalks. Distant laughter. Footprints overlapping like proof that life was still moving. Her chest tightened. This was when it hurt the most, when Christmas didn't fix anything. She reached into her sweater pocket and felt the folded paper. Her wish. She didn't take it out. She was afraid to look at it again. That was when the knock came. It wasn't loud. It wasn't confident. Just a soft tapping, like someone who didn't want to disturb the wrong kind of silence. Her mother hesitated before opening the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and real. A boy stood on the porch. He was about her age, 8, maybe, wrapped in a coat that looked like it had belonged to someone else first. His gloves didn't match. His nose was red from the cold. He held something behind his back. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "My dad said it was okay to come say hello. We just moved in next door." His voice cracked slightly, like he was afraid of being sent away. Ruth stepped aside. "Come in," she said. The boy walked in slowly, eyes adjusting to the warmth. He noticed Camilla immediately. Not her chair. Her. He swallowed and brought his hands forward. "I'm Daniel," he said. "This is for you." He held out a small box, wrapped unevenly. The tape was visible in places, like it had been done carefully by small hands. Camilla hesitated. Then she took it. Inside was a snow globe. When she shook it, the snow fell thick and slow, covering a tiny house with a glowing window. "It's not new," Daniel said quickly. "But it still works. I think it's lucky." Camilla laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised them both. Daniel smiled, relieved. They sat together on the floor, close to the tree. Daniel talked about his old house, about how moving felt strange, about how Christmas didn't feel right when you didn't know anyone yet. Camilla listened. She didn't talk about the fall. She didn't talk about her legs. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't asked to explain herself. When Daniel stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said. Not a question. A promise. That night, Camilla lay in bed holding the snow globe against her chest. The weight of it was comforting. She shook it once more and watched the snow fall slowly, covering everything evenly. For the first time since the fall, Camilla felt something loosen inside her. Not hope. Not yet. But the loneliness shifted. And sometimes, that is how miracles begin. The days after Christmas felt longer than the days before it. The decorations stayed up, but their shine softened. The tree needles began to fall, quietly collecting on the floor like time slipping through fingers. Daniel came back the next day. And the day after that. And the day after that too. Sometimes he knocked. Sometimes he just sat on the step outside until Ruth noticed him through the window. He never arrived with questions. He arrived with presence. They spent hours doing nothing special. Daniel would sit on the floor and talk about school, the way desks felt too big, the way teachers smiled differently when they felt sorry for you. Camilla listened and laughed at the right places, then stopped laughing when it felt fake. Sometimes they sat in silence. Camilla learned that silence felt different when someone chose to stay inside it with you. Winter pressed on. Therapy days were the hardest. On those mornings, Camilla woke up already tired. The clinic smelled like rubber mats and quiet disappointment. Other children practiced walking while parents clapped too loudly, trying to make progress sound like victory. Camilla tried. She really did. Her legs shook violently when she stood. Pain crawled up her spine like something alive. Sometimes she managed seconds. Sometimes she collapsed before even standing. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was the way people watched her. The way hope flickered on their faces, then dimmed. At home, she said nothing. Daniel noticed anyway. One afternoon, she snapped at him. "I don't want to try anymore," she said suddenly. "What's the point?" Daniel froze. Camilla immediately wished she could take it back. But the words had already escaped, heavy and ugly and true. Daniel didn't tell her to be strong. He didn't say everything would be okay. He just sat down beside her chair and stared at the floor. "My dad says some things don't get fixed," he said quietly. "They just change." Camilla swallowed. She hated that answer. Because it sounded real. That night, she cried harder than she had since the fall. Not loudly. Quietly. Into her pillow. She cried for the girl she used to be. For the stairs. For the feeling of running without thinking. She cried because Christmas was supposed to be magic, and magic hadn't come the way she needed it to. In the weeks that followed, something else appeared. Anger. She felt it when children passed her too fast on the sidewalk. She felt it when people spoke slowly to her, like pain had made her smaller. She felt it when Daniel stood up easily, without thinking. One day, she refused to leave the house. Daniel knocked anyway. Ruth opened the door and whispered something to him. He nodded. Then he sat on the porch outside Camilla's window and started building a tiny snowman. Then another. Then another. Camilla watched from inside, wrapped in a blanket, angry and hurting and unable to look away. When he finished, he held up a small stick sign. It read, "Waiting." Something inside Camilla cracked. That night, she dreamed of walking. Not running. Not jumping. Just walking, slow, uneven, but hairs. When she woke up, the dream hurt worse than reality. But she held on to it anyway. Because dreams, even painful ones, meant she hadn't given up completely. Winter stretched into something heavier. But deep beneath it, unseen and stubborn, something fragile was still alive. The cold came back stronger than before. Not the kind that dusted the streets with beauty, but the kind that settled into bones and refused to leave. Camilla felt it most in the mornings. She woke up already tired, her legs aching before they even touched the floor. Some days, she didn't bother trying to move them at all. She just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around her. Ruth noticed the change. She noticed how Camilla stopped asking about therapy. How she stopped counting progress. How she stopped talking about the future altogether. One evening, Ruth sat on the edge of Camilla's bed and brushed her hair slowly, carefully. "You don't have to be strong all the time," she whispered. Camilla didn't answer. Because strength was exhausting. The holidays came again, quietly announcing themselves in store windows and radio songs that felt too cheerful to trust. Christmas lights appeared outside, blinking the same way they had the year before. Camilla turned away from them. She didn't want to hope again. Hope had hurt her once already. Daniel still came. Even when Camilla barely spoke. Even when she asked him to leave early. Even when she pretended to be asleep. One afternoon, she finally said the thing she had been carrying for weeks. "Why do you keep coming here?" she asked, not unkindly, but tired. Daniel didn't answer right away. He picked at a loose thread on his sleeve, then said, "Because you didn't stop being you just because something broke." Camilla felt tears burn behind her eyes. She turned her face away. That night, she dreamed of the stairs again. Not falling this time, just standing at the bottom, looking up. The steps felt taller than she remembered. Impossible. When she woke up, she knew something with painful certainty. She couldn't do this forever. The next therapy session was the worst one yet. Her legs refused to cooperate. Her muscles shook violently. She fell. Not hard. But hard enough to break whatever confidence she had left. On the drive home, Camilla stared out the window and said nothing. That evening, she took the snow globe Daniel had given her and placed it back under the tree box in the closet. She didn't want reminders of magic anymore. Magic felt cruel now. Days passed. Then one morning, Camilla heard something unusual. Laughter. Not outside. Inside the house. She followed the sound and found Daniel in the living room, struggling with a box of decorations Ruth had pulled out. "What are you doing?" Camilla asked. Daniel looked up, smiling nervously. "Christmas," he said. "It's coming." Camilla's chest tightened. "I don't want it," she said quietly. Daniel paused. Then he said something that stayed with her. "Maybe Christmas isn't about fixing things," he said. "Maybe it's about staying." That night, Camilla lay awake thinking about all the ways she had tried to leave her own life without going anywhere. She thought about the girl she used to be. She thought about the girl she was now. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to wonder if both could exist at once. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall again. Soft. Careful. Like the world was trying not to scare her. And deep inside Camilla, beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion, something shifted. Not into hope. Into willingness to try one more time. Outside, snow fell quietly, covering the world in forgiveness. Inside, Christmas stayed. Not as a day, but as a feeling. One Camilla would carry with her, step by careful step. And when the house finally grew quiet again, when the dishes were cleared and the lights were dimmed, Camilla realized something else had changed. The fear was still there. But it no longer sat in the center of her chest. It had moved to the edges. That night, after Daniel went home and Ruth kissed her forehead and turned off the lamp, Camilla lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling. Pipes creaked. Wind brushed against the windows. Somewhere, a clock counted time without urgency. Her legs ached deeply now, the kind of ache that came from effort instead of injury. She welcomed it. Pain from trying felt different than pain from loss. She closed her eyes and replayed the moment again and again, the way the floor felt under her foot, the way the tree needles brushed her skin, the sound Daniel made when he realized she wasn't falling. She wondered how many moments like that existed in the world, unnoticed, quiet, powerful in ways no one ever applauded. The next morning came slower than usual. Not because the day moved differently, but because Camilla did. She woke with the familiar stiffness, but also with something else beneath it. A faint curiosity. A question she hadn't allowed herself to ask in a long time. What if yesterday wasn't a peak? What if it was a beginning? Ruth noticed the change immediately. Not because Camilla said anything. She didn't. But because she asked to get dressed before breakfast. It was a small thing. Almost nothing. But Ruth had learned to recognize small things. She helped Camilla pull on her sweater gently, careful around her legs, careful around her hope. Neither of them mentioned Christmas. Neither of them mentioned what had happened the day before. They let it rest. Later, when Daniel came by again, not with excitement, not with expectation, just with the same quiet presence, Camilla asked him if he wanted to sit by the window with her. They watched the snow melt slowly where sunlight touched it. I thought miracles would feel louder, Camilla said after a while. Daniel tilted his head. Louder how? I don't know. Like fireworks. Or music. Or everyone knowing at once. Daniel thought about that. Maybe loud things don't last, he said. My dad says the quiet ones are the ones you carry. Camilla didn't answer. But she held on to that sentence like it was something fragile and important. The days that followed Christmas blurred together in soft ways. Nothing dramatic happened. And that was the hardest part. There were no sudden breakthroughs. No mornings where Camilla woke up healed. No moment where fear vanished completely. Instead, there were repetitions. Standing for a few seconds longer. Sitting down before shaking turned into panic. Learning the exact moment when her body needed rest instead of push. Some days, she surprised herself. Other days, she didn't try at all. And she learned that both were allowed. Daniel became part of the rhythm. Not as motivation. Not as pressure. Just as presence. He did homework on the floor while she practiced standing. He told her stories about school. He talked about ordinary things, lunch, teachers, snowball fights he didn't fully enjoy because they reminded him of what she couldn't do yet. Yet. That word stayed between them. Ruth watched it all with quiet awe. She had spent so long trying to fix things, to soften pain, to protect Camilla from disappointment, and now she realized that healing didn't need protection. It needed space. One evening, weeks later, Ruth found Camilla standing at the kitchen counter with her crutches, staring out the window. I didn't tell you, Camilla said without turning around, because I didn't want you to worry. Ruth swallowed. Tell me anyway, she said. I'm still scared, Camilla whispered. Every time I stand, I think about falling again. Ruth stepped closer but didn't interrupt. But now, Camilla continued, I'm more scared of not trying. That was when Ruth cried. Not because of sadness. Because of recognition. Winter deepened. Snow became heavier. Days became shorter. And the world seemed to move inward, asking everyone to slow down. Camilla learned the shape of her limits. She learned the sound her body made when it was ready to stop. She learned the difference between pain that warned and pain that passed. She learned that strength didn't announce itself, it revealed itself quietly, over time. One afternoon, alone in the living room, Camilla stood without realizing she had done it. There was no countdown. No witness. No tree glowing nearby. Just her. And the floor. And the space between them. She stood there for 3 seconds. Then 4. Then sat down again, heart pounding, smiling to herself like she had just shared a secret with the world. That night, she didn't tell anyone. She wanted the moment to stay hers a little longer. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, something warmer than Christmas lingered. Not belief. Not certainty. But something just as powerful. Trust. Trust that healing didn't need permission. Trust that progress didn't need witnesses. Trust that even if walking took time, or never fully returned, she was already moving forward in ways no one could take from her. And somewhere between winter nights and quiet mornings, Camilla began to understand something she had never learned before the fall. That miracles don't always change your body. Sometimes, they change the way you stay. Time began to behave differently after Christmas. The days didn't feel empty anymore, but they didn't feel full either. They stretched. They asked to be lived in, not rushed through. Camilla noticed how mornings arrived without urgency now, how the light crept across her bedroom wall slowly, as if it, too, was learning how to move carefully. Some mornings she woke hopeful. Other mornings she woke tired before she even moved. She learned not to judge either feeling. There were days when her legs felt like strangers again. Days when standing felt heavier than it had the day before. Those days hurt the most, not physically, but emotionally, because they whispered lies. They told her that progress wasn't real, that Christmas had been a trick of light and warmth and timing. On those days, Camilla stayed seated. She watched the world instead of stepping into it. And she learned something important during those quiet hours. Healing wasn't a straight line. It curved. It doubled back. Sometimes it paused so long it felt like it had ended. Daniel learned to read those days too. He didn't bring encouragement when she didn't ask for it. He didn't say things like, "You'll get there," or "Just keep trying." Instead, he talked about small things. About a book he was reading. About how snow sounded different when it fell on ice instead of grass. About how his gloves always got wet no matter how careful he was. Normal things. And somehow, normal things made the heavy days lighter. One afternoon, weeks later, Camilla watched Daniel lace up his boots by the door. "Do you ever get tired of coming here?" she asked suddenly. Daniel paused, confused. "Why would I?" "Because I'm slow," she said. "Because sometimes I don't move at all." Daniel straightened and looked at her for a long moment. "My dad says," he began, then stopped, as if reconsidering. "No. I think this myself." He sat back down. "I don't come here to watch you walk," he said. "I come here because this is where I want to be." Camilla looked away quickly, blinking hard. That night, she dreamed again. Not of falling, but of standing at the top of the stairs, looking down. The steps were still tall. Still intimidating. But this time, she wasn't afraid of them. She woke with her heart racing, not from fear, but from possibility. As winter wore on, Ruth returned to work more often. Life demanded it. Bills didn't pause for miracles. Schedules didn't adjust for emotional recovery. But Ruth checked in constantly, asking the same questions in different ways, trying not to sound afraid. Camilla could hear the effort behind her voice. One evening, while Ruth prepared dinner, Camilla stood at the counter with her crutches, watching steam rise from a pot. "I remember the sound," Camilla said quietly. Ruth turned. "The sound of what?" "The stairs," Camilla replied. "Right before I fell. They made a sound like they were tired." Ruth's breath caught. "They weren't tired," she said softly. "They were just stairs." Camilla nodded. "I know. But for a long time, I thought they were angry at me." Ruth crossed the room and rested her forehead gently against Camilla's temple. "They were never angry," she whispered. "And neither was your body." Camilla closed her eyes. Some truths took time to settle. Spring began hinting at itself quietly, not with warmth, but with light. Days stretched longer. Snow softened. The world looked less brittle. With it came a new kind of fear. What if progress stalled? What if Christmas really had been the best it would ever get? Camilla didn't say these thoughts out loud. She didn't want to give them power. But they followed her into therapy sessions, into quiet afternoons, into moments when her legs shook unexpectedly. One day, after a particularly difficult attempt, she sat back down harder than she meant to. Daniel flinched. "I hate this," Camilla said suddenly, her voice breaking. "I hate that I don't know if tomorrow will be better or worse. I hate that I can't trust my own body." Daniel didn't rush to respond. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. Camilla nodded. "When my mom left," he said, staring at the floor, "everyone kept telling me it would get better. I waited for that day. And it didn't come the way I thought." Camilla listened carefully. "But then one day," he continued, "I realized it wasn't worse either. It was just different. And different didn't mean broken." Camilla absorbed that slowly. Different didn't mean broken. Weeks later, Camilla took 3 steps without crutches. They were uneven, unsteady, terrifying. She didn't repeat them right away. She sat down and cried instead. Not because of pain. Because of relief. Ruth wasn't home. Daniel wasn't there yet. No one saw it happen. And that made it feel more real. When Daniel arrived later, she told him. He smiled, not wide, not loud, just enough to let her know he believed her. "I knew you would," he said. Camilla frowned. "You didn't." Daniel shrugged. "I knew you'd keep going. That's different." Spring finally arrived. The world outside changed faster than Camilla did. Kids ran again. People moved without thinking. Life resumed its careless pace. Sometimes that hurt. But sometimes it inspired. One afternoon, Camilla stood by the open door, crutches beside her, feeling fresh air brush her face. "Do you want to try the porch?" Daniel asked gently. Camilla looked at the step. "Just one." She nodded. It took her nearly 5 minutes. Her legs shook violently. Her heart pounded. Fear screamed at her to stop. But when her foot touched the porch, solid and steady, she laughed out loud. Free. She didn't go any farther that day. She didn't need to. That night, as the sun set later than it used to, Camilla lay in bed thinking about all the ways Christmas had lied to her, and all the ways it hadn't. It hadn't fixed her. It hadn't healed her overnight. But it had given her something she didn't know she needed. Time. Time to trust herself again. Time to learn her body without resentment. Time to believe that miracles could be quiet and still matter. Outside, the last of the snow melted into the earth. Inside, Camilla held onto something warmer than certainty. Patience. And for the first time since the fall, she didn't feel like she was waiting for her life to start again. She felt like she was already living it. By the time summer edged closer, Camilla no longer measured her days by what she couldn't do. That realization surprised her. She noticed it one morning when she woke and didn't immediately think about her legs. The thought came later, quietly, like something remembering its place rather than demanding attention. She noticed it when she laughed without checking whether it hurt. When she talked about the future without pausing first. When she planned small things, ordinary things, like what book to read next, or what color she wanted her room to be painted. These were not milestones anyone celebrated. But they mattered. Daniel changed too. He grew taller, leaner, a little more awkward in the way children do when they are on the edge of becoming something else. His voice cracked sometimes when he got excited. He pretended not to notice. He still came often. Not every day anymore. Life had begun to widen again, but enough that his presence still felt like part of the house's rhythm. Sometimes they sat in silence. Sometimes they argued about silly things. Sometimes they talked about nothing and everything at once. And sometimes Camilla watched him move, run, jump, spin, and felt something sharp rise in her chest. Not jealousy. Grief. It came unexpectedly, like a memory she hadn't invited. One afternoon, after Daniel left, Camilla sat alone in the living room, staring at the space where he had been pacing while telling a story. Her crutches rested against the wall. The wheelchair stood unused nearby, more a reminder than a necessity now. She stood slowly and crossed the room, step by careful step, until she reached the spot where he'd been. She stood there longer than usual. Then she sat down again, breathing hard, hands shaking. And for the first time in months, she cried the kind of cry she hadn't allowed herself. Not from pain. From mourning. She mourned the girl who used to race downstairs without thinking. The girl who trusted her body without question. The girl who believed accidents only happened to other people. That girl wasn't coming back. And pretending she was, had been exhausting. When Ruth came home later and found Camilla curled up on the couch, eyes red, she didn't ask what was wrong. She sat beside her and waited. Eventually, Camilla spoke. "I think I've been trying to become who I was," she said softly, "instead of learning who I am now." Ruth nodded slowly. "That makes sense," she said. "But you don't owe the past anything." Camilla leaned into her mother's shoulder. That night, she wrote something down for the first time since Christmas. Not a wish. A promise. "I will not rush myself just to feel normal." Summer arrived gently. With it came invitations. A neighbor's birthday party. A short walk in the park. A school event she had skipped the year before. Each invitation brought a question with it. Can I? Should I? What if I can't? Camilla learned to answer differently. "I'll try," she said. Not yes. Not no. Just I'll try. At the park, she walked slowly beside Daniel, stopping often, letting him adjust his pace without complaint. Children ran past them, laughing, shouting, falling and getting back up again. Camilla watched them with a strange calm. Once, that sight would have broken her. Now, it reminded her of something important. Everyone falls. Not everyone learns how to stand again in the same way. Later, when her legs grew tired, she sat on a bench and let the sun warm her face. Daniel flopped down beside her. "You're not slow," he said suddenly. Camilla smiled. "I am." "No," he insisted. "You're just paying attention." That stayed with her. Paying attention. To her body. To her limits. To her strength. By the end of summer, Camilla could walk across the house without help. She still used her crutches outside. She still rested often. She still had days when her legs felt unreliable. But she also had days when she forgot to be afraid. Those days felt like gifts. One evening, as the light softened and the air cooled, Camilla stood at the bottom of the stairs. She hadn't planned to. She had been passing by when she stopped, heart suddenly loud in her chest. The stairs hadn't changed. They were the same shape. The same height. The same quiet presence. Daniel was there, sitting on the couch, watching her carefully. Ruth stood in the kitchen doorway. No one said anything. Camilla placed her foot on the first step. Her body stiffened automatically, memory surging. She breathed. Slow. Steady. Then she lifted her other foot. One step. She stopped. Her legs trembled violently. She felt fear rise like a wave, sharp, convincing, familiar. She could stop. No one expected her to continue. That realization gave her strength. She took another step. Then another. Halfway up, she paused, tears blurring her vision. She wasn't climbing the stairs to prove anything. She was climbing them because she could choose to. When she reached the top, she didn't celebrate. She sat down on the step, heart pounding, hands shaking. Ruth covered her mouth, crying quietly. Daniel stood, eyes wide, but said nothing. Camilla rested her forehead against her knees and laughed softly. "I don't hate them anymore," she said. She stayed there for a long time. Not because she was tired. Because she wanted to remember how it felt. Later that night, lying in bed, Camilla thought about Christmas again. How she had begged for a miracle. How she had expected magic to look like sudden healing. Now she understood. Magic had come disguised as time. As patience. As a boy who stayed. As a body that remembered, slowly. As a heart that learned how to trust again. She didn't know what the future would look like. She didn't need to. For the first time since the fall, she wasn't trying to get back to her life. She was moving forward into it. And that, she realized, was the real miracle. Autumn arrived without asking for permission. Leaves changed color quietly, like they didn't want to draw attention to themselves. The air cooled. The light shifted. And Camilla noticed that the year was turning again. She noticed it in small ways. In the way she needed an extra sweater in the mornings. In the way shadows stretched longer across the living room floor. In the way stores began to whisper Christmas long before anyone was ready to hear it. This time, the word didn't hurt. It made her pause, yes, but it didn't close her chest the way it used to. Camilla had begun school again. Not full days at first. Not without accommodations. But she went. The first morning, Ruth walked her to the door, hands hovering uselessly, unsure where to help and where to step back. "I'll be right here," Ruth said. Camilla nodded, adjusting her crutches. "I know." That mattered. At school, children stared, not cruelly, just curiously. Some asked questions without understanding they might hurt. Others avoided the subject entirely. Camilla answered what she wanted to answer. She learned that she didn't owe anyone her story just because they were curious. Daniel waited for her after school most days. They walked home together, slowly, talking about assignments and teachers and things that had nothing to do with legs or healing. Normal things. Those were the moments that healed her the most. By late fall, Camilla no longer used her wheelchair except on the longest days. It sat folded in the corner now, not forgotten, but respected, a reminder of where she had been, not a sentence of where she would stay. Some nights, when her legs ached deeply, she touched it gently, grateful instead of angry. Pain had taught her gratitude in strange ways. One evening, while Ruth sorted through old boxes in the hallway closet, she paused. "Camilla," she said softly. "Come here." Camilla stepped carefully into the hallway. Ruth held up a familiar box. Christmas decorations. For a moment, neither of them moved. Last year rushed back, the careful silence, the fear of saying the wrong thing, the miracle that came quietly and changed everything. Ruth swallowed. We don't have to do anything yet. Camilla looked at the box. Then she smiled, small, but real. We can open it, she said. Just to see. They opened it slowly. Lights tangled together. Ornaments wrapped in tissue paper. A small ceramic angel with one wing chipped. Nothing dramatic happened. No tears. No fear. No sudden memories that overwhelmed her. Just familiarity. And warmth. December arrived. Snow returned, gentle at first, then heavier, like it remembered how much it mattered to her. Camilla stood by the window one morning, watching it fall, and realized something surprising. She wasn't waiting for Christmas. She was already inside it. The house filled with light again, not careful light this time, but confident, warm, unafraid. Music played softly. Ruth hummed while cooking. Decorations went up without hesitation. Daniel came over one afternoon carrying a small box. Don't open it yet, he said quickly. It's not for now. Camilla raised an eyebrow. That's suspicious. He smiled. It's for later. They decorated the tree together. Camilla stood the entire time. Not because she was proving anything. Because she wanted to. When Christmas Eve arrived again, it didn't feel fragile. It felt full. Camilla went to bed tired in the best way, legs aching from use, heart calm. That night, she dreamed again. Not of stairs. Not of falling. She dreamed of walking through snow, slowly, leaving footprints behind her that didn't disappear right away. Christmas morning came bright and cold. Camilla walked into the living room without her crutches. Ruth noticed, her breath catching, but she didn't comment. Daniel noticed too. He smiled. They opened presents lazily, letting the morning stretch. When it was Daniel's turn, he handed Camilla the small box he had brought earlier. She held it carefully. Inside was a bracelet. Simple. Soft leather. A small charm shaped like a footprint. I saw it and thought of you, he said quietly. Because you keep going. Even when it's slow. Camilla's throat tightened. She slipped it on. I like slow, she said. It means I notice more. Later that day, Camilla stood by the tree again. Just like last year. But this time, she didn't need to lean on it. She stood on her own, feet steady, heart full. She thought about the girl she had been. The girl who wished for magic to fix her. The girl who didn't yet know that miracles sometimes arrive disguised as patience, persistence, and people who stay. Outside, snow fell steadily. Inside, Christmas wrapped itself around her again. Not as fear. Not as longing. But as gratitude. And Camilla knew, without doubt, without needing proof, that even if life changed again, even if she fell again someday, she knew how to stand. The years that followed did not arrive with announcements. They came quietly, one after another, like pages turning when no one is watching. Camilla grew taller. Her hair grew longer. Her crutches leaned more often against walls instead of resting in her hands. Some days she forgot where she had placed them. Other days, she needed them again. Both kinds of days were allowed. That was something she had learned. Healing was not a straight road. It bent. It paused. Sometimes it circled back on itself just to remind her where she had started. She no longer measured her life in what she could or could not do. She measured it in moments. In mornings when she woke without fear. In afternoons when she walked home laughing with Daniel. In evenings when her legs ached but her heart felt light. Pain still visited. It always did. But pain was no longer the loudest voice in the room. Middle school arrived, then high school. The building was bigger. The hallways louder. The stairs fewer, replaced by glances that held curiosity instead of judgment. Camilla learned how to advocate for herself without shrinking. I'll take the stairs today, she'd say. Or, I need the elevator this time. Both statements were true. Neither required explanation. Ruth watched all of this quietly. She had learned something too. That loving someone did not mean guarding them from every fall. Sometimes it meant trusting them to stand back up. Daniel stayed. Not out of obligation. Not out of pity. He stayed because staying had become natural. They grew in different ways, interests shifting, dreams stretching wider, but they kept circling back to each other, tethered by something neither of them ever named. On cold days, when Camilla walked slower, Daniel adjusted his pace without comment. On strong days, when Camilla moved faster, Daniel jogged to keep up, laughing. They learned the rhythm of each other. Christmas came every year. The first few after the miracle felt tentative, joyful, but aware. But slowly, the carefulness faded. Christmas returned to what it had always been meant to be. A season. Not a test. Camilla still loved it deeply. The lights. The music. The way the world softened for a while. But she no longer placed all her hope inside one morning. She had learned that miracles didn't like pressure. One December, many years later, Camilla stood at the top of a staircase. Not the same one. But close enough. She had avoided stairs for a long time after the accident. Elevators had felt safer. Ramps more predictable. Flat ground less demanding. But this staircase was narrow and wooden, inside a quiet cabin where snow pressed against the windows. Daniel stood below, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Take your time," he said. She placed her hand on the railing. Her breath slowed. She remembered the fear, not vividly, but respectfully. Like you remember fire after being burned once. With awareness, not terror. One step. Another. Her body responded smoothly, cooperatively. At the bottom, Daniel handed her a mug. "You did it," he said. Camilla smiled. "I've been doing it for years," she replied. That night, as snow fell thick and steady, they sat by the fire and talked about the past. Not with pain. With gratitude. Camilla spoke of the wheelchair. Of the long nights practicing alone. Of the fear she had carried quietly. Daniel spoke of the first day he saw her sitting by the tree. Of how he didn't know what to say, only that he didn't want to leave. Ruth's voice echoed in Camilla's memory, gentle, steady, present through it all. Later, when everyone slept, Camilla stepped outside alone. Snow crunched beneath her boots. She stood under the open sky, breath visible, heart calm. She thought of the little girl she once was. The girl who wished for one thing. The girl who didn't know yet that life would give her something different, something slower, deeper, and more enduring. Camilla closed her eyes. She wasn't thankful because she could walk. She was thankful because she had learned how to wait without breaking. Because she had learned that strength could be quiet. That miracles could be incomplete and still holy. That sometimes, the greatest gift Christmas gives is not the ending we imagine, but the courage to keep going when the lights are dim, the road is uneven, and hope has to be carried instead of expected. Inside the cabin, lights glowed warmly. Outside, snow covered everything, softening edges, forgiving footprints, making room for new ones. Camilla turned back toward the door. She walked inside. And Christmas followed her. Not as a miracle she waited for, but as a truth she lived. Some miracles arrive loudly. They announce themselves with celebration, with sudden change, with everything falling perfectly into place. But the ones that stay, the ones that truly change us, often arrive quietly. They arrive in the nights when no one is watching. In the moments we try again even though we are afraid. In the people who choose to stay when fixing us isn't possible. Camilla never became the girl she was before the fall. And that was never the miracle. The miracle was that she became someone who could carry hope without it crushing her. Someone who learned that healing doesn't always mean restoring what was lost. Sometimes it means discovering what remains. She learned that strength doesn't shout. It whispers. It waits. It walks at its own pace. Christmas didn't erase her pain. It didn't rewrite her story. It simply reminded her that even in broken seasons, light still shows up. Not to rush us. Not to pressure us. But to sit beside us until we're ready. And maybe that's the kind of miracle many of us are still waiting for. Not the kind that changes everything overnight, but the kind that helps us stand again, even if only for a moment, and believe that tomorrow is still worth meeting. So if you're watching this while carrying something heavy, while walking slowly, or while wondering if your miracle missed you. Let this be your reminder. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. And your story is not finished. Sometimes, the greatest gift isn't the moment we rise, but the courage to keep trying. If this story touched a part of your heart, if it reminded you of someone you love, or of a season you survived, take a moment to gently support this space. Like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe so we can continue telling stories that remind us that we're not alone in our waiting. Until the next story, may your steps be patient, your heart be light, and may Christmas live in you, long after the season has passed.